Okay, this is the last evening in this particular series, and let me see if I can find the topic. Maybe not. Oh yeah, here we go. Next week we start 2 or 3 weeks, probably. Certainly one, likely two. Discovering everyday rituals, prayers, or contemplative practices that best encourage you in the ways of love. So how to love, but then finding everyday rituals, prayers, contemplative practice. It seemed like in Lent season that made sense to look for resources. I don't see, well, ideally, the Lenten season is really a great spiritual opportunity. The ideally, maybe a month before, you're beginning to think what you might do with Lent. You know, what you might add to the 40 days that's special, what you might give up for the 40 days. Most of us don't do that. I think an alternative is to use the Lenten season to incorporate practices in your life that will go on after Lent. You know, this is a season where you focus on the crucifixion of Christ and the resurrection. And so it's appropriate in those 40 days to also be thinking, what might I incorporate in my life and that will work and sustain me long after Lent is over. And so in that spirit, trying to share together rituals, prayers, contemplative practices that best encourage us in the way of love. Thank you for your attention through this rather challenging series. I hope it's been productive. I think it has been. I think it's been good that we pay attention to the gospel sounding like good news to us. If it means that God wants good things to happen to everyone, starting with the people we are convinced are the problem. In highly politicized times, to whoever you may be, the way politicians code it, left, right, whoever, other people are the problem. And so okay, learning to love the people that I may suppose I've been told they're the problem, and I'm kind of convinced, well, they are the problem. Okay, fine. Then let's learn how to love them. You know, that's what's going on. Let's learn how to love them, because we're meant to love everyone. And the church is meant, you can't keep politics out of the church. Politics is every way we structure ourselves. Politics is the way society structures itself. You can't keep it out of the church, but you can keep partisanship out of the church, and you can keep being dismissive of others. You can keep being unfair in your thinking of various people, not trying to understand, just writing people off. And you know, that happens across the board. And honestly, our society encourages it in many ways. Don't do it. It's not what followers of Jesus do. Okay, so I'm on page 8, and that's where we pretty much end. Sort of the final challenges that I thought of as I composed this series a couple of months ago now. Consider how the following societal challenges might best, that is, most lovingly be met. And we started into this last week, and we're going to finish it out this week. But we talked about how to tell the truth kindly. And we shared some ideas on that. And I'm going to remind us of some of them. Go light on labels. Labels really never encourage responsive dialogue, doesn't encourage relationship, just alienates, divides, polarizes. Go light on labels, cuts conversation down. Go light on labels, be strong on principles. You know, whatever your principles may be, moral, ethical, political, whatever they may be, don't apologize for them. Learn to state them clearly and confidently, but don't label people and don't dismiss them because they may hold to other principles. Don't misrepresent people. Is that actually what they're saying, or is that some kind of straw man? It's easy to dispute assertions that are not being made by anyone. You know, but you know, well, those people believe this. Are you sure? Are you sure they believe that? It's easier to dispute assertions that are not being made sometimes than the ones that are being made. Seeking always to understand. To me, that's been a mantra for 20, 30 years. And, you know, in the middle of conflict, in the middle of tough times, and, you know, whatever it may be, if you can, pause and seek to understand what is going on here. And then being conscious of how you'll be heard. Play it back in your mind, especially on social media, because you have time to do it on social media. You have time to think through, what did I just write? And this is what I meant. But is that the only way that could be heard? And so be conscious of how you'll be heard, and especially be conscious of sounding dismissive or condescending. You know, all of that's important. It's important to tell the truth, and it's important to tell the truth kindly. Both of those are important. Ideas on how to teach history hopefully. Now, context of raising that challenge is that quite a number of people in America feel that in schools at various levels, American history is being told as simply a story of exploitation and slavery. It's capitalism run amok. And of course, slavery is capitalism run amok. There's all sorts of other forms of capitalism that work quite well, but slavery is a form of capitalism too, maximizing capital and exploiting labor. It's the kind of the ultimate. But they look at it and say, what happened to the history we used to tell of heroes and founding fathers who came up with great principles? You know, what happened to that story? And we feel like our grandkids aren't hearing that anymore. Okay, so a thought or two. What do we think on how to teach history hopefully? Now, one idea would be to leave everything bad out, right? That would be hopefully, it just wouldn't be true. It wouldn't actually be history. But so allowing for that, how to teach history hopefully.
Well, I'll dive in, Dale, and it's probably a dumb response, but you know, I think we should first pose the question, why do we learn history? And one answer is so that we don't repeat the mistakes of the past, and so that we do repeat the things that made us better.
Yeah. Yeah, and the attempt to make us better is like kind of hopeful, folks. Yeah, exactly. That's a great place to start. It's all about It's all about becoming better. And I don't care how good you are. It's a really great idea to be better. And I think the very best people are the ones who actually know that, who aren't content with where they are, who want to do better than they have done.
Dale, I wrote down, when we don't know the whole story, we minimize the real strides that we've made.
Well put. Everyone catch that. If we do not tell the whole story, we minimize the strides we have made. Any story of progress begins from a place we probably do not want to have got stuck. And America is, I mean, it has its ups and downs, it runs into its rough patches, but it is a story of progress. And I think that's what we can all agree on. And that's very well put. How to teach history, hopefully.
I've not been in a history class in a long time, so who knows? But it seems to me like when I've talked with kids, grandkids, when we get to I guess it's Black History Month is this February? I think the attempt there is to bring out into the forefront some of the leaders of changing, trying to make changes for the Black people in our country, and those who are coming out of that slavery position. And there's some there's some really great stories there. And I think those stories are coming forward. Now, in order to tell their stories, you have to tell where they came from and why they had to overcome so much. Yeah. But those stories I think are very helpful.
Extremely. I mean, there's heroes all over the place. We're not trying to rob history of its heroism.
And there's a lot of, when people talk about history around the Holocaust, there's a lot of the emphasis on Gentile people who helped like Schindler's List and Corrie ten Boom, and the family that tried to save Anne Frank's family. You have a lot of those stories that are very human, and other stories of hope and helping one another.
Yeah. How to teach history, hopefully. I think we make, I think to look back, say 400 years ago, and hold a culture to the same standards we figured out 10 years ago is not a very good idea. Does that make sense to everybody? I mean, we figured civil rights out a little late, but we do figure it out 50, 60 years ago. And then we look back and say, and those people, 150 years ago didn't believe that. Well, yeah, they didn't believe that, but when did we figure it out? Some of us don't seem to have figured it out yet, so you can't look back and say, so what's wrong with those people? Well, there is an arc of, history, and it tends toward justice. So I think, all of those things, I think history can be told. I love history. And
I never would guess that. I never would guess that. History. But Dale, to your point, but some people did the right thing back then.
Yeah.
I visited a plantation, Chantilly plantation in Virginia someplace, and heard the stories of the plantation owner whose children refused to own people.
Yeah.
So it wasn't, they all believed one thing. There were some people, there's always that dissonance going on
Yeah,
that finally kind of, spread throughout the country and into the highest offices of our land and that sort of thing. But it was always there. That kernel was always there.
Mhm.
and that's where history to me gets really, really interesting. Back in the 1500s, in the Spanish conquest of Central and South America today, what we call them today, and the treatment of indigenous people, which quickly turned bad. But over in Spain, there was a guy named Bartolome de las Casas, a friar of, I forget what order, but he made an impassioned case for treating indigenous people in humane ways as a believer in Jesus. And that's where it gets really interesting. A lot of people weren't saying that. What made him stand up and go against everything and hold forth to the point that the king and queen of Spain listened to him carefully? He was very effective and never forgotten. His writings on the history of the Indies are still make much of the moral case that ever could be made, and he got it 500 years ago. So it's those kind of things. I'm going to say tonight, I'm taking the next 5, I'm going to read them together and say respond to any of them that you wish to. And then the last 4, I'm going to treat as a unit 2. But responding to anyone or any group being dismissed as deplorable. It should make us pretty uncomfortable. It's regrettable when that happens. And I think even the people who did it, know it's regrettable. Like if they could have swallowed their words and gone backwards, they would have loved to have done that. The engaging in social media, understanding more clearly why we do it, and best, most loving practices. Comments on that, would love to hear it. Awareness, no. Well, I'm going to take these one at a time. Let's go with social media. I don't know quite what to say here, but I know I have to fight ego all the time on social media. Why am I doing this? And I hope most of the time it's not just pure ego. But there's a lot of ego out there. There's a lot of arrogance. There's a lot of anger. There's a lot of things going on. And so, I'm just saying, those of us who engage frequently on it, and I'm one, keeping good track of why we do it, what's driving us here, but more importantly, what are best and most loving practices? Best and most loving practices on social media.
Well, I'm going to point to Laconia.
Yeah, I was
Because Laconia displays a good bit of bravery.
Yeah.
Because he'll focus on things that I'm not brave enough to focus on, but he's always going to teach me as a result. And when he takes flack, which is quite frequent, he teaches another lesson in kindness and good manners. And maybe I would engage more on social media if I had the ability to do it the way Laconia does, but I don't.
So what are you thinking, Laconia? I mean, you must have like 2 or 3 principles that you have in your mind or more. Do do they come to mind?
Well, the first thing I think of is I really don't have a life because I'm on social media all the time. So was that Eddie laughing?
No,
That was me.
Okay, well, you just confirmed what I said. I have a couple of reasons. One, a lot of my right-wing Harding friends, and I don't say that negatively, and I have right-wing friends who are very open-minded, but I'm talking about extreme right-wing. And I should also say I have extreme left-wing, and I try to be as tough, if I can say it that way, on them
Yeah.
when they're excoriating extreme right people as if they are God's gift to the world.
I've heard you go both ways. Yeah.
Yeah. Number two, I think of something that you say, Dale. I'm not there to win the argument. I'm there to put stuff out that I think believers specifically ought to think about. And number three, if I make a mistake, I try to have the humble pie enough to apologize, and I try to do that when it occurs. I'm certainly not all put together. I'm searching, and that's hopefully the kind of spirit in which I'm engaging.
Yeah, and I hear deliberate efforts to keep your ego out of it. When I'm listening to you on that, which is when I'm wrong, what's the news in that? I'm
Yeah.
often wrong. So no big problem. I'm not here to win an argument. I'm here to present what my own beliefs and convictions are, and I expect that they're not shared by everyone.
Yeah.
And they're welcome to. Now, I had a friend once, I'll put quotation marks around friend a little bit, but when he would engage me on Facebook, the silly thing about all of this is he and I were essentially aligned on almost every important thing. But he had to go on and on and on. He would hijack a post. And you know what I mean? I mean, you make your 4-sentence position or cite an article or whatever and make your point. He would come on and scroll down like a page worth. Well, I had like a big problem with that because it killed conversation. I mean, anyone who sees a whole page of something on Facebook just moves on, and here my friend who essentially agreed with me and everything, but just had to be heard. I mean, and I just finally had to just say, you can't do that on my post. That's why you have a page. If you want to do your page worths of stuff, do it on your own post. But yeah.
Post.
A what?
What's a post?
What's a post?
Yeah, what's that?
A post is the message you put on Facebook. You've seen them, right?
No, not really.
Okay, that's okay. Don't worry about it.
Just fade out for a bit.
Okay.
Yeah, you know what I mean? I mean, I have no problem with you not
Mhm.
going that route. I mean,
Facebook is something you put on the computer
yeah,
and you.
I'll show you afterwards.
Okay, yeah, go ahead. I don't.
Yeah, yeah.
Hey, Dale,
Yeah,
I just want to go back to something that John said, and I want to thank John. But I would say that I think a lot of how I approach arguments on Facebook is because of how we've learned, the word isn't argue, but to debate kindly within our church family. And that's been a model for me. And I value that tremendously. And I don't think I'm where I am because I had some, magical enlightenment. I think it's because we've wrestled with stuff in our own church family, and we've done it with grace. And I think that's the model for me. So I am because of how we are.
Okay. Good.
You're welcome, Lot.
The not needing to win the argument. This is true not only in Facebook, but in real life and in face-to-face encounters. Let the other person have the last word. Just say, be willing to do that. You don't always have to do that, but it sure saves me a whole lot of time. I've got other friends on Facebook who insist on having the last word. Their posts go on to like 50 comments, 35 of them made by them. And it just, what is your urgency? What is your problem? Is what I'm eventually thinking. And I've made my point when I go on Facebook, if I'm touching on something controversial and not just putting pretty pictures, but I've made my point. I don't have to force you to bow to my point. You make your point. I don't have to correct you. We both made our points. Move on. That saves a lot of time and a lot of agita on my part. No obligation to make the last word or to have the last word. And that's helped me enormously. The next one, which I think is a major challenge and really quite important, which is the awareness of an open inquiry into those who see things very different from us. And I have a lot of curiosity about that. A lot of awareness of people who see things very different from me, and open inquiry into it. And then I put in parentheses, or why should I read Thomas Sowell? I don't know how many know that name, Thomas Sowell. Debbie's over there shaking her head negatively.
Maybe I do, but I forgot.
Thomas Sowell, I think, is part of the Hoover Institute at Stanford University. And for maybe the last 30, 40 years has written book after book after book from a position that generally tracks, most people would say, conservative. But honestly, I don't even think Thomas Sowell cares whether he's conservative or liberal. He cares whether he has his facts straight. And so Thomas Sowell says things that tend to rile sort of self-satisfied left-wing people, I might say. He's not trying to rile them. He's just trying to say, wait a second. Here's another way of looking at immigration that makes a whole lot of sense. And when you get into Thomas Sowell, you realize you've gone to a place that no one's going. No one's going there. And he goes all over the world. He knows his history backwards and forwards. He knows economics backwards and forwards. He knows demography backwards and forwards. He has 500-page books on migration, period, just migration, the process of migration around the world. Our debates come down to some little things that get done on the southern border of Texas. Thomas Sowell writes a 500-page book on migration around the world. And that's what needs to be read. I haven't read that book for the record, but I wish it were a 50-page book. but that's the mind of Thomas Sowell. And I was introduced to Thomas Sowell by Wendell Gunn. And Thomas Sowell is a go-to source for Wendell. And I went, oh, yeah, sure thing. And then I looked it up and, oh, this guy is saying things no one else is saying. And coming at it from angles nobody else is coming at. And yeah, you know, there, I have his book called, I think, a Thomas Sowell Reader, you know, excerpts, key excerpts. And I dip into that book regularly and often see something, oh, I hadn't thought of that. That's a new angle on that issue. And he's cognizant of issues all over the place. The point is, yes, having open inquiry to people who see things very differently than you do, whatever that may be, very helpful. The dangers of cancel culture. Do we generally know what cancel culture is? Do we know what book burning is? I mean, book burning we've known for centuries. You know, I mean, through the Middle Ages. I mean, you know, you had book burning, you know, well, we don't have book burning now usually, but we have book banning, right? And we have
One question I have about what we mean by that is like, is that the same thing as deciding you're gonna boycott a particular product because you think that that company that's producing that product is, you know, is a company that you find disrespectful, or you find that they're unethical? Is that the same thing, or is cancel culture the same thing as, you know, be saying, I don't care to listen to this piece of music. I don't care to listen to this piece of this, go to this movie or to watch this television show. I'm boycotting that because I don't think it represents the values I want to invest my time and energy in. Is that the same thing as cancel culture?
yes,
When you step away from the things that you find.
all of the above.
Okay.
The-
So I don't see, to me, they seem to be talking about different things, but I'm not sure where that
Well,
line is.
I'm going to make one comment and then Margie's got something to say. My point here is that cancel culture is the same as a book banning. I mean, one group of people tend to take some of the greatest books in the American canon and say, but they make uncomfortable points. We don't want our kids to read them. Well, actually, it's perfectly legitimate. If you don't want your kids to read them, don't have your kids read them. But you can't make a law that says no other kids get to read them. You know, that's where the problem comes. But to me, I see no ethical difference between the book banning, which gets associated with churches like, with states like Tennessee and others. I see no difference between that morally and cancel culture, which may happen in Ivy League schools. You know, Margie.
I was just gonna say something similar to what you just said. It's one thing when I decide I'm not going to read this book, or I decide I'm not going to support this project. But cancel culture to me is when somebody says, and I insist that you pass a law or something that nobody else can read this book, or that you fire the person who said that.
Yeah.
Because I don't like what he said. It's like from saying, I'm not going to do it, I'm not going to listen to it, I'm not going to buy it, to saying nobody else is allowed to listen to it or buy it or to read it.
Could a person, let's say I wanted to boycott something, would it still be okay for me to go to appeal to my friends that I would like to tell you about this, and I appeal to you to boycott this as well?
Yeah.
As long as you're not boycotting Israel, that's illegal in several states.
Is you
in the
what?
country.
As
As long as you're not boycotting Israel, because that's illegal in several states in
Well,
this
that's
country.
true, I guess that is true.
Okay, here's what I, to me, what the problem in cancel culture is. When good-hearted people, at least as good-hearted as the rest of us, make all too human mistakes and ill-advised comments and are ridden off of college and talk show circuits for a fairly random comment, but it just didn't fit with academic orthodoxy. And their careers go down the tubes. They lose their jobs. That's, to me, cancel culture. It's a little different than boycotting a product. It's ruining a person's livelihood because they made an ill-advised comment.
Mhm.
And that's just flat wrong. A sportscaster, you know, numbers of years ago, and I just remember the case, but not the name of the sportscaster, but you know, maybe he'd had a little too much to drink that night. But he says something that's kind of off the scale on the air one night, and he's gone from the whole industry
Mhm.
and saying, no, that's what I mean by cancel culture, where a person is canceled, and that's to me a little different than a product.
Mhm.
But they all have things you have to think through. But what I'm really talking about is when people lose their careers, reputations, or their publishers, or when, here's another way that cancel culture works. When gifted leaders, writers, and artists of previous generations are held to standards of moral awareness and insight that the rest of us only came to a decade ago.
Mhm.
I mean, I don't like what William Faulkner wrote.
Mhm.
Okay, William Faulkner wrote it 60 years ago, and we all thought that then. You know, it doesn't mean William Faulkner isn't a great writer. And so now you've crossed the line between cancel culture and book banning, and they turn out to be the same thing.
Mhm.
You know, so the left can't be throwing grenades at the right when the right has every reason to throw grenades at the left, because you're both being ungracious, you know? Hell,
Well, I haven't said much. But on this one, the goal of cancel culture to me, as I know it, is punishment. I want to punish you for thinking the way you do and for not thinking the way I do.
I agree.
Mhm.
This punishment thing is out of control.
Yeah,
It's absolutely out of control everywhere.
yeah,
These days, in my opinion, for the 72 years I've walked this earth, it's worse now than ever in my life. I've never seen it like this.
what happened to Grace?
The vitriol is so unbridled. It's just it's scary.
Yeah,
And how can you be a child of God if all you want to do is dismiss what you don't believe in?
Yeah.
Or what you don't like?
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
So that's what I have to say.
No, that's well put.
Why do we have to punish?
Yeah. Well,
Are we supposed to be punishers?
it kind of goes back to what would Jesus do?
Boy, everything goes back to that. If you're a
Exactly.
Christian,
Exactly.
in my mind, that's why I'm here.
Yeah. Yeah, I
So,
don't see Jesus banning books, and I don't see him canceling people.
matter of fact, he took them in.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
Dale, I think when we're thinking about human interactions, right? I think we have to consider, well, what is the motive behind my behavior?
Right.
If it's to stir vitriol, you know, or make people feel bad or punish them or correct them or whatever, really, is that really that helpful? I mean, as humans, we should strive to inspire and lead, not stir venom amongst each other.
exactly. Well put, John.
Yeah. Yeah. The
I don't mean to sound stupid or nothing, but what is right wing and what is left wing? What does that mean?
Well, those are actually good questions because they're not helpful categories. So maybe you might want to stay in ignorance. No.
In the bliss of ignorance.
Happy oblivion. But to answer your question, the political world is generally, we speak of conservatives off on the right wing and liberals off on the left wing. They tend, at this point in time, they tend to be generally associated with Republicans are off on the right wing and Democrats are off on the left wing. That wouldn't always have been true. I mean, 50 years ago, Republicans were as important to the civil rights movement as Democrats were.
Party of Lincoln.
Or, yeah, but at this point in time, but even more than that, well, another area that gets hit with the name right wing often are huge evangelical churches that take really harsh stands on this, that, or the other. And not all evangelicals. Evangelicals are some of the most conscious-driven people I know. A number of them are, but the evangelical church has tended to be co-opted by the conservative end of the country and by Republican politics in a very partisan kind of way. Often when people talk about the right wing, they're talking about them.
It sounds so confusing.
It is.
Stay
Right
confused.
wing, left wing, or who's the right wing and.
Cheap goats.
Okay,
I don't know,
yeah.
it is. I don't want to take all the
But
time.
no, okay,
You know,
okay,
it's-
but the point, and this has been an emphasis in this series. Labels are not helpful.
Yeah.
Helpful, labels are just not helpful, and particularly when you decide that person is that. I mean, that's the end of your discussion. You know, and so there are labels all over the place, and once or twice I've heard them in this series.
What am I? What would I be?
You're Jamie, they broke the mold.
Would I be right wing or would I be left?
People would think you were right wing from what I understand of your politics. But the bottom line would be, if I dug deeply into what you were thinking, you would have some left-wing positions. You would just be being unfairly labeled right-wing. That's how I see it. But people would generally consider what I've heard of your politics, would generally consider it right-wing. But I'm saying, I don't like the label, and I don't even think you quite fit the label.
He doesn't.
No, you don't fit a label, but the point is, almost no human being fits the label. Some of them have unfortunately taken the label on and endorsed it. And that's a mistake too. But for me to say that especially some group of people I really don't know at all, say they're that. That's the problem in the country.
I see, last question and real quick, will I always be a right wing? Once you're wing, are you always?
No, Jeff,
No,
that's the point. You're right wing and you're not even right wing. You know, but
You're a child of God, Jamie. That's what you are. You're a child of God.
They're on the back.
You have wings.
You have wings.
Take on that label. Take on that label.
that's what this,
I'm a servant of Christ.
that's what
That's
this,
even better.
that's what this whole unit has been about. What John just said, we are children of God, we are servants of Christ, and we are servants of other people. And we are not discernibly right wing or left wing, and we certainly don't take those labels on as if we endorse labeling. We
Right.
don't.
Okay.
We don't.
I know what Jamie is. He's a Jamist.
That's it. But I'm gonna go on. The best section I ever read on cancel culture, and I'm delighted to say this, came from someone on the left. Because left-wing people are kind of waking up and saying, we are swallowing our own tail. We are devouring ourselves. Well, that wherever the labels go, left or right, that's right too. I mean, the House of Representatives right now is controlled largely by Republicans and by a handful of what are they called? Used to be called the Tea Party, whatever.
What's the Freedom Caucus?
Freedom Caucus, that's the term. And it's a relatively small group of people who are kind of like the fulcrum that turn the House. But within them, there's orthodoxy tests all the time. I mean, you're not Freedom Caucus enough. Well, on the right, that's what's being said too. You're not on the left. On the left, that's what's being said too. You're not left-wing enough. You're not one of us. So this person, a woman named Michaela Loesch, she's a climate action activist. But I'm reading her book for that reason, because Allison Kazansky told me to. And Allison Kazansky, that's her career. I mean, sustainability is her career. She said, you got to read this book. So I read the book. It's good on all counts, but it was the chapter on cancel culture that she throws in there. And this is essentially the point she's making. That when movements, or say colleges or churches or media cancel, no, everyone makes mistakes. Sooner or later, everyone makes big mistakes. Everyone is in process. No, Jamie, you won't always be what you are, what you might be this evening. You won't be that tomorrow evening. But everyone's in process. Everyone in their unguarded moments or in unguarded seasons of their life says and does things that are not representative of who they are. Everybody does that. And when movements, say colleges or churches or media, cancel them, it's the movements that eventually suffer. How so? Distrust of everyone and everything wins out. That's a problem in America, because across the board, people are saying, you're not enough of this. You're failing at this, you're failing at that. You don't represent us well. You're not loyal. You're not. What happens? Distrust of everyone and everything wins out. Okay, cancel culture. I make a mistake and I'm kind of gone. People do what? People fear making mistakes, right? And when and thus fail to make the progress that only comes from making mistakes. Does that make sense to everyone too? I mean, what do I learn most from my glorious successes?
No.
Well, when I have a few, I'll see, but no, you don't learn from that. You learn from your mistakes. I learn so much more from the mistakes I make than from the things I get right. But in cancel culture, people fear making mistakes and thus fail to make the progress that only comes from mistakes. And voices, sometimes important voices, are silenced. Diversity and respect for difference and dissent suffers. And then Michaela Loesch goes to this wonderful place. She rightly attributes all this to the siren call of perfectionism. That and what she's done there, and she doesn't quote this, but she goes to exactly where the Apostle Paul went, which is the letter kills, but the Spirit gives life. And that is what's happening on the left and on the right. And the church has to hold its ground and say it's grace, it's kindness, it's seeking to understand one another. It's not labeling one another. It's not canceling one another. diversity and respect for difference and dissent matters. And the reason we fail at this is that call that's almost wired into unsuspecting hearts, which is perfectionism. You have to be perfectly correct. You have to be exactly like me in faith and practice, or I can't fellowship you. You know, that would mean and eventually you kind of watch what the world's been doing for several hundred years, being exactly like me in faith and practice, or I can't fellowship you. And so what we have, thousands of churches. We'd end up in churches of one, because there's nobody who holds exactly what I believe in faith and practice, or you. What you believe is completely unique. If you stop and think about it, there's things that you believe that no one else, that combination of things no one else holds, it's just yours. But when you're, you know, when you start, in other words, what Loesch is saying is it's legalism. The problem is legalism. It's a problem on the left. It's a problem on the right. It's a problem wherever it shows up. It's a problem. Legalism is always a problem. And so what, yeah, okay, that's probably good enough for tonight.
Dale, if I could, Dale, I think Elaine is in the room, but I can't quite tell.
Yeah,
With this camera, and
she
I'm
is.
just reminded that yesterday was Tamari's birthday, and Elaine, I remember a number of the lessons that Tamari taught me, and probably the most important one was to be inquisitive as to how the other person's doing. So he lives on, and we are better because of him. So happy birthday to Tamari.
Thank you.
Good job.
Here's to Tamari.
Yep.
You had a good mother
Very good mother.
who's still with us.
Gave us a great gift.
But
Okay.
I was telling them when we're coming, he's still with us. And that's the way
She still likes to wait for people.
And he lives on. And so no one who knew him ever forgets him. Okay, here's the last things I want us to remember, which is the last four things. Remembering all the life experiences and all the time it took for you to reach the conclusions you have reached. And to quit expecting from others instant conversion to what likely took you years. Right?
Yeah.
You know, that's fundamental. Finding strength in weakness, in emptying yourself. Hence this series of Sunday morning talks that a number of speakers are taking us through now. That's critical, to empty or have the same mind in us that was in Christ Jesus, who being equal with God did not consider equality with God to be a thing to be held on to be grasped, to be clenched, but emptied himself and took the form of a servant. That's fundamental. I mean, if we could flood the halls of Congress with people with that attitude, our country would turn on a dime. You know, it would just turn on a dime there's some people there now, probably their voices aren't being heard well enough. But anyway, communicating more compellingly that the God we worship is the God who is love. That's what's fundamental here. And are we acting in loving ways? Because the God we worship is the God who is love. And then figuring out, this is how we began this unit years ago, whenever we started. Figuring out how to make sure we sustain loving relationships, even with those with whom we have evident disagreements. Now catch that one here, you know, figuring out how to make sure we sustain loving relationships, even with those with whom we have evident disagreements. Now, how would you do that? You would tell them. You would tell them, I may not agree with you on this point, but I sure do love you. You know, I mean, that's what the relationships, you know, Jamie, you and I do that. I mean, I don't agree with you. You don't agree with me, but we love one another.
Amen.
And that's exactly what, just tell them. I mean, you can be very clear in what you believe and that it might be very different than your friend. But if you follow that up with, and you know, you're as good a friend as I've got. I mean, Wendell and I disagree on all sorts of things. And the conversation always ends with Wendell saying, and you're as good a friend as I got.
Sure.
You know, so tell them that whatever differences in view we may have doesn't affect how I feel about you. You know, you've got my back and I've got yours.
Yeah.
Okay, that's it. Thank you for the.
Thank you.
Sweet dreams, everybody.
Take
Good night.
care. Good night.
Night.
What's the old?
This